How ICD-11 may change the training and practice of addiction psychiatry by Dr. Atul Ambedkar. For this session, I would like to invite the chairperson, Professor S.K. Mattu. He is our former HOD and currently consultant psychiatrist in Newcastle, UK. His areas of interest are addiction psychiatry, and he has around 206 publications to his credits. He has won around 7 national and regional awards of IPS. Our next chairperson is Dr. Abhishek Ghosh.
Can we skip that? Can we skip that, Sabrish?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
Now I'd like to invite the chairperson to introduce the speaker.
I'll just pin Dr. Mattu. Just skip a minute. Yeah, sir is also here.
Dr. Abhishek, you please take over because I'll be leaving in about 10 minutes time. Sorry about that.
Yes, sir.
I'll be here for about 10 minutes. Yeah.
We know that we are already running short of time. Already.
It's okay. It's okay.
Half an
Please take
hour
over.
to 40 minutes late.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mattu, for making it possible from the UK. I think it's around 8:30 now, UK time.
Quarter to 9.
quarter to 9 to be precise. A very good afternoon to everyone. I know it's lunch time, but you are going to hear from one of the most fascinating speakers from which I have heard from. So he is going to captivate the entire audience. Dr. Atul Ambedkar does not require an introduction. This is a cliche line. I would like to take it from some of you might be aware of the word association test. So if you do the word association test, addiction psychiatry in India, perhaps you will find one of the few names, and one of the names would be Sir Dr. Professor Atul Ambedkar. One just important point of relevance here that Dr. Atul Ambedkar and his team has directly worked in the development of the ICD-11, and they have run the field trial in India and subcontinent for ICD-11. So you are going to hear from the horse's mouth, so to say. So over to Dr. Ambedkar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, organizers, and thanks a lot, Abhishek, for this very kind introduction. Thank you, Mattu sir, also for joining for this talk, even for 10-15 minutes. It would be my honor and privilege. So the task given to me is talking about the addiction psychiatry and the impact of ICD-11 changes on that. That's what we are going to discuss. So basically what we need to realize is that as far as the impact on training or practice goes, it's only something which can be predicted, which can be hypothesized, which can be projected. The proof of pudding would be as it were, which will be only when we apply it in our day-to-day practice, when we teach and then learn as we go along the way. So as far as ICD-11 and the addiction psychiatry goes, before I begin, some very quick announcements. I have no specific conflict of interest. As the chairperson also said, I was the principal investigator for the beta versions field trial in India. In today, I will focus largely on disorder due to substance use, and hence the whole subcategory of substance-induced mental disorders. That will not be focused upon today. Later, when we have the breakout session workshop, more practical application of the diagnostic guidelines which we discussed now in this session, that will be an opportunity. So I'll request particularly the younger colleagues to do join us in the breakout session later in the day. As I was saying, this is the picture which all of us must have seen. It went viral from years back. Are these stairs coming up or going down? The famous optical illusion. Similar is the case perhaps with the ICD-11 changes in addiction psychiatry, where some people say it's a progress, some people say no, it's not really a progress, it's something, it's not really an improvement, but a sort of decline. So one of the changes that ICD-11 has brought is they have expanded the scope of addictions in general. So addictions, as we all knew, were used to be a phenomena associated with use of certain psychoactive substances. But now, for the first time under these mental behavioral neurodevelopmental disorders, WHO has decided that addictive behaviors could be of two kinds: disorders due to substance use as well as disorders due to addictive behaviors. So that itself is a very important conceptual shift. Certain behaviors have been deemed to be addictive in nature and be leading to a condition which can be classified and diagnosed as a type of addiction. So that itself is an important conceptual shift, which will bring certainly some new ways of working, practicing, training, researching in the area of addiction psychiatry. In fact, in parallel with this also, WHO itself made some changes in their overall organization. So earlier, the division of WHO dealing with this particular area was called this Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. Curiously, there was no abuse as a diagnostic category anywhere in ICD, but still their division was called that. Now it has been renamed as HAVE, Alcohol, Drugs and Addictive Behaviors Unit. So that's how the recognition has seeped in there. And I perhaps this should then sort of reflect at other places as well. In India, the substance use specialty section of Indian Psychiatric Society earlier has now been termed as addictive disorder specialty section. So again, reflecting the addictions which can occur because of behaviors as well. But more on this later. One of the important changes, as I was saying, increasing the scope. So one of the increasing the scope of addictive substances has been increasing in the number as well as change in some of the terminologies that WHO uses. So if, for instance, if we compare from ICD-10 to ICD-11, substance categories on which people can develop addictive disorders, that has increased now. So the cannabinoids now is cannabis as well as synthetic cannabinoids. Solvents are now inhalants. The sedative hypnotics also now includes anxiolytics, which is a really welcome change. Similarly, tobacco is now called as nicotine. We also have added caffeine there as a stimulant which can give rise to disorders, and as well as synthetic cathinones. Similarly, a lot of other synthetic products, they find their mention now, including dissociative drugs such as ketamine has been specifically named now. There is also our categories of other specified psychoactive substances as well as use of non-psychoactive substances. So as we can see here, the products, the substances whose repetitive use can be termed as pathological, disordered, has now been increased. Why? What are the implications here? There are increasingly use of alternative forms of nicotine. Traditional nicotine delivery system has been tobacco, but now people are using nicotine, industrially synthesized nicotine, in a variety of forms. Perhaps non-prescription use of nicotine replacement therapies, as well as a lot of electronic nicotine delivery devices, the e-cigarettes and so on. So considering this particular reality, it's a wise move to use the term nicotine use disorders or nicotine dependence rather than tobacco. Similarly, caffeine, there is increasing public health importance in lot of other kind of products. Caffeine is mixed, and which leads to their addictive potential. And there are energy drinks, there are illegal mixtures of caffeine and methamphetamine and so on. Similarly, world is dealing with this whole new category of substances broadly termed under the umbrella of new psychoactive substances. New means produced or synthesized, new because they are not under the list of internationally controlled substances. And since these substances are increasingly propping up, they need to find some way, there need to be some way of reflecting this in the diagnostic and classificatory systems. Even the non-psychoactive substances, which can also lead to repetitive consumption and associated health problems, antacid, vitamins, herbal remedies, laxatives have been included here. So obviously all of this will have, which means there are more now possible diagnostic categories, it will be possible now to provide specific management for this. This expanded list must be taken care of in the epidemiological studies and in the surveys that we design. So this reality must be reflected in the epidemiological data that the country submits to United Nations or to WHO. Similarly, in the same lines, our teaching material, the language and terminology that we use, that needs to reflect all these changes. So these are some of the minor kind of changes, but one will have to deal with them in terms of clinical practice as well as training. Another important change that has been brought by ICD-11 is the change in the concept of harmful use. Earlier, if we look at the classification tree, we had just the category of harmful use in ICD-10, basically summarized as use despite physical or mental harm to individual, to the person using the substance. Now we have two types of harmful use categories. One is an episode of harmful use of the particular substance, as well as harmful pattern of use. This is a newer development, which now recognize that even a single episode of use of a substance can also lead to harm, and that can itself become a diagnostic category, independent of that harm itself. So a single episode of substance led to damage to person's physical or mental health, or has resulted in behavior leading to harm to the health of others, which is also a newer concept introduced first time in ICD-11 with significant implications. When it comes to the health of the users, the harm can be behaviors related to intoxication, or it may be toxic effect on the body organs or system, or even the harmful route of administration. So suppose injecting drug use, rather than the drug itself, it's the route of administration which can lead to harm, and hence this particular description. The newer addition here is harm to health of others. So now ICD-11 recognizes that psychoactive substance use can lead to harms to health of others as well, apart from the users themselves. And this may be any form of physical harm, including trauma or mental disorder. And this harm is directly attributable to behavior due to substance intoxication, which means on the user. So this is a clear distinction. So there is some degree of expansion of the concept of harm, and yet the definition of that harm to others has been now seriously restricted or constricted. This diagnosis doesn't apply if we know that this has been the pattern of use of that person. So if the person is already satisfied the diagnosis of harmful pattern of use, then there is no point in making a diagnosis of single episode. So basically, this single episode diagnosis category will come in handy when more information about the pattern of substance use is not available. See someone in emergency, you just know that they have consumed a particular substance and have landed up in the casualty. We don't know what has been the pattern of use in the past. That kind of history at this moment is not available. But still, the single episode of harmful use diagnosis can be entertained, can be recorded, and any intervention on the basis of this can be planned or delivered. For certain substances, the single episode of harmful use category, the harm to others doesn't apply. So caffeine, nicotine, NPS, they do not recognize harm to others as the criteria for making single episode of harmful use of caffeine, nicotine, or NPS. Then this is the known category. We know from the ICD-10 as well, harmful pattern of use, which pattern leads to damage to person's physical or mental health. But here again, the newer addition of behavior leading to harm to health of others. The further description is similar. Health of individual can be toxic effects, harmful route, harm to health of others can be directly attributable to behavior, which can be physical harm or mental disorder. The course can be episodic or continuous. And again, for nicotine or NPS, the harm to others doesn't apply. We are talking only to harmful use of the individual themselves. The major change as far as harmful use term goes is about this new category of single episode of harmful use, the harmful pattern of substance use, which also includes now harm to others. So these are some of the major changes which have some clinical, where this boost to this single episode of harmful use comes from. The research has shown, for instance, I'm citing just one particular study here in which Vladimir Pozniak from WHO was also involved. This was a multi-country cross-sectional study, basically emergency room visitors, more than 18,000. At that time, there was no sign of alcohol intoxication or withdrawal, but in some of them, there was history of alcohol of drinking, and they had alcohol attributable injuries. A small proportion, but the proportion was there. So the idea here is, from a clinical as well as from public health perspective, it's important to make a diagnosis for such people who may have used substance only once, or they may have been using substance in a non-problematic pattern, but today happened to be the day when it resulted in some kind of harm. So that episode also may require coding, may require to be recorded as a diagnosis, so that some intervention can be planned and delivered to them. Suppose insurance or the health system policies require a diagnosis to be entertained to deliver a particular intervention. So in those kind of situations, having this that will come in handy. Of course, it's recognized that this diagnosis may be temporary. So when you have more information available, you may be able to make a diagnosis of actually harmful pattern of use or even dependence. One doesn't know. But till then, this provision can be useful. Another important development is this particular issue of harm to others. This is a large-scale study, the cover page which I am showing here, in 9 countries which where WHO conducted this study. India was involved there. Professor Vivek Benegal from NIMHANS, they conducted this particular work in Karnataka. Another study, which also a multiple country study, they looked at violence-related injuries, and among those patients, they looked at patients' self-report of drinking within 6 hours of event, and their perception that whoever hit them, the perpetrator of violence, they had also been drinking. And across all countries, in general, they found that 63% of violence-related injuries involved alcohol use, either by victim or by perpetrators or both. So in other words, it's now recognized that yes, alcohol can cause harm to others. This can be physical or mental health harm to others. And this itself can be a pattern of consumption, which needs to figure as a diagnostic indicator, as a diagnostic feature. Another very important study, which I am very fond of citing in many of my talks and presentation and papers, the famous David Nutt's study of drug harm in the UK, where they made a comparative analysis of various substances on different parameters in which they can cause harms. Now, most of these parameters, if we see carefully, physical harm or dependence, they are about harms to the individual. Some of them are also social harms, including other social harms, which may include harms to others as well. And on this basis, they actually ranked the substances as per the harm to, as per their propensity to cause harms. And of course, they famously put alcohol as the most harmful substances, followed by heroin, cocaine, and then tobacco. So alcohol and tobacco were among the top substances which can cause harms, and legal. Quite a few illegal substances, including cannabis, they had much lower ranking in terms of harms. And all these rankings were based upon the parameters of both harms to users and harm to others. As we can see in this graph, alcohol tops the chart, not only because of harms to users, but largely because more harm to others. So psychoactive substance use can cause harms to others has been recognized, and now this recognition has reached in a way to the diagnostic system as well. In fact, the literature has talked about a variety of harms to others. The harm may be to community, noise, vandalism, property damage. People can do all this under intoxication. Familial harms, spousal abuse, child neglect, workplace related issues, There may be physical or sexual assault on others. So there can be a wide variety of harms to others which may occur because of psychoactive substance use. But for the purpose of harmful use in the ICD-11, the WHO limits itself to physical or mental health harm to others. So just nuisance or some kind of other problems in the society is not being regarded as the diagnostic feature of harmful pattern of use. You must be causing some physical or mental health harm to others. So that's the rider there. Is it really useful? And one way of doing this would be to look at the data from large-scale survey. Louisa Dragonhart, the world-famous researcher doing these kinds of studies, they conducted this large-scale trial in which they tried to look at concordance of ICD-11 with, at that time it was only the proposed criteria, with ICD-10 and DSM-10 diagnosis in a community-based samples. So what they found was, within the overall category of ICD-11 harmful use, most frequently endorsed symptom in the survey were recurrent use resulting in failure to fulfill major obligations and recurrent use in hazardous situation. In fact, the least endorsed symptom was harm to others. In fact, when they excluded the harm to others, there was hardly any change in the community level prevalence of harmful use in cannabis users. In alcohol users, there was actually small decrease in 0.4%. So this may be just a rounding of kind of data error, but the point here is the utility of this particular concept of harm to others, its value addition appears not very large at this moment. In general, it may be seen just as a tacit recognition that yes, substance use can cause harms to others. But by itself, it's unlikely that it will cause a large-scale increase in the diagnosable health conditions in the community. Dependence. This is the major category we all deal with clinically in our teaching and training. Perhaps major category which has public health importance as well. So we will devote some time to it. Dependence syndrome in ICD-10 was fairly simple, straightforward. We have all learned this, have been practicing it. This 3 out of 6 of craving, tolerance, withdrawal, preoccupation with use, loss of control, and use despite harm. Almost now verbatim to all of us. In ICD-11, story is slightly different now. ICD-11 seeks to describe dependence as in conceptual terms rather than what they describe dependence in ICD-11 as a disorder of regulation which arises from repeated or continuous use. The characteristic feature, the term used here is strong internal drive. It's a very interesting term, a very fascinating term, which finds its way in the diagnostic system. Strong internal drive and the disorder of regulation arising from repeated or continuous use. So if there is assumed to be this strong internal drive, how does it externally manifest? How do we externally make a judgment about presence of this internal drive? By these things: impaired ability to control use, increasing priority harms or negative consequences. So what ICD-11 telling us is that individuals suffering from dependence have strong internal drive to use the substance, which looks outside by their difficulty in controlling, more priority and continuous use despite harms. And this results in a disorder of regulation of substance use. The another addition description is it is often accompanied by craving. Craving is not essential. Also, very important criteria for us clinically, the tolerance and withdrawal, which are the physiological features, they may also be present. Again, pointing at their non-essentiality for making a diagnosis. In fact, for hallucinogens, dissociative drugs, unknown substances, they have not been mentioned at all. And these are period present for 12 months, but maybe diagnosed if present for more than 1 month or so. So in a very interesting way, dependence has been conceptualized and described in ICD-11. There is strong internal drive, but again, the disease is actually arises from repeated and continuous use. You have a disease and hence you are using repeatedly? No, you are using it repeatedly, which results in the disease, which is the disorder of regulation. That's the inference. They have specifier in terms of the course, which may be early full remission, sustained full remission, depending on the duration. And in between, there may be partial remission when when your consumption goes down or all your features of dependence, they are not met. Why? Why do these changes have been there in ICD-11? So basically, there is a considerable amount of research, including neurobiological research, particularly largely for alcohol, where alcohol depending repetitive use of alcohol. So the primary pathology, they say, is not biological, but it's an acquired pathology. There may be neurobiological vulnerabilities, which results in repetitive use. This repetitive use results in that so-called disorder of regulation, adaptive response, which manifests as what we see as alcohol dependence. This is also a good development, the specifier of remission. Professor Basu and Dr. Ghosh, a very useful, very important paper in Indian Journal of Social Psychiatry, where they describe all these changes. I'm just borrowing it from a lot of material from them. So currently abstinent or not, which was the ICD-10 approach, this more continuous model perhaps is more useful clinically and perhaps less stigmatizing as well. But craving, that importance of craving perhaps is being diminished in ICD-11, and that's what some people believe. Despite the fact that we know that in lot of patients, a large majority, they report craving as the feature of their dependence. The rates are very high. Craving, in fact, may be a reason for relapse in many substances. And more importantly, we have now anti-craving medications. We have some non-pharmacological interventions designed to address craving. So despite of such clinical importance of craving, in the diagnostic scheme of things, the importance of craving seems to have slightly diminished. ICD-11 considers it just more of an accessory item. Again, some research in the same research of Louisa Dragonhart, it can give us some pointers about this. Most commonly endorsed symptoms for ICD-11 dependence were impaired control, centrality of drug use, which happen to be the features of dependence. The physiological signs, what we call as tolerance or withdrawal, they were in fact one of the least endorsed. So that gives some credence to the way ICD-11 have conceptualized their dependence. When people have in the same paper different diagnostic categories, they found excellent concordance between the dependence of ICD-10 and DSM-4 dependence. When it comes to DSM-5, severe substance use disorder, again, data was reasonably good between ICD-11 dependence and moderate or severe substance use disorder in DSM. Poorest, as expected, was DSM-5, any category of substance use disorder, any severity, because we know it's a large umbrella term which corresponds to some amount of harmful use of ICD as well, which goes as mild substance use disorder in DSM-5. A few words about hazardous use in ICD-11. It's not a diagnostic category as such, described as a health risk factor, but the description is interesting and maybe clinically relevant. They say a pattern of substance use that appreciably increases risk of physical or mental health consequences to users or to others to an extent that warrants attention and advice from health professionals. And this increased risk, when they call, it may be a wide variety of risk. It may be due to the frequency of use, amount, the associated behavior, the context or setting in which this use is occurring. In fact, these harms or consequences may be short-term or long-term or physical or even functioning as well. So as we can see, a large variety of harms can occur, because of substance use, it can be labeled as hazardous substance use. But if the harm has actually occurred, it has to be physical or mental health harm to be regarded as harmful use. So we can see the difference in the approach there, because it is assumed that this will have a large number of people who may fall into this category, who may require some degree of intervention. So they themselves are not ill or diseased. Their behavior may require health action in terms of some preventive interventions, which can be required in the clinical as well as community settings. So there are certain occupations, people if they use alcohol, pregnant females if they are using some substances. So these may fall into this hazardous category. This was about the substance use. We are reaching the end now. The addictive behaviors, I will not go into too many details here. The description as used by ICD-11 is interesting. Recognizable, clinically significant syndrome associated with distress or interference with functioning. So both distress or functioning have been given, impaired functioning has been given importance here. Developing as well as a result of repetitive rewarding behaviors other than use of dependence producing substances. So this is a very, very interesting thing which I found in this description. Primary dependence is something which occurs with psychoactive substances only. That's the recognition here. But there are some behaviors which also can be rewarding, which also can be reinforcing other than the use of dependence producing substances. So the centrality of substance use in terms of addiction, that gets reflected here. This is the description of gambling or gaming disorder, persistent or recurring behavior. Impaired control, which again may manifest by a wide variety in terms of onset, frequency, intensity, duration. Increasing priority, continuous use despite harm. So this is the parallel with the substance use dependence criteria. Course may be continuous or episodic or recurrent. And of course, there may be distress or functioning or impairment of functioning in a wide variety of areas of life. So far, so good. This is one category on which a lot of debate, discussion has been taken place ad nauseum for last many years. I have myself been part of many forums or discussions which have been talking, discussing, writing, publishing about this particular issue. In general, at this moment, the category is here to stay. The complaint people may have in terms of implications is some people are complaining it may be too inclusive. Even normal gaming may be pathologized here, may be labeled, which is not good. In fact, and on the other hand, some people are saying, no, this is too restrictive. It's only talking of gaming or gambling. What about other addictive behaviors? People are talking of social media addiction. People are concerned with increased screen use among children or adolescents. They see that as an addiction. Internet use in general has been there. Internet addiction or internet use disorder, an entity has been making rounds for a very long time now. So at this moment, the classificatory system permits us making gambling or gaming disorder as diagnosis and plan interventions for this. For other kinds of things, we can have some kind of interventions as without having the label of these diagnoses. Very quickly summarizing the results of the field testing that I was talking about. I was very ably, our team worked really hard there. We tried to test ICD-11 on the parameters of clinical utility, feasibility, stability through a variety of methodologies, key informant surveys, focus groups, two very large scale expert reviews, external independent expert reviews conducted by Professor Pratibha Murthy, Professor Debashish Basu, and finally tying it up in the form of an online CME and workshop and open discussion. In general, if we have to distill and summarize, the concerns expressed by the Indian psychiatrist about ICD-11 substance use and addictive behavior categories is that certain concept need more elaboration, more contextual specification. such as single episode, some discomfort persists there, gaming disorder in general, hazardous gaming as a category. Periodic review hence of ICD-11 may be useful as a recommendation. And if we were to talk about smooth transition from ICD-10 to 11, some amount of resources, training, etc. will be required. In general, the consensus has been that there are some major changes, some minor changes. Most of these changes are easy to understand. One can empathize, one can take cognizance of why these changes have been brought about. Their utility in the clinical practice, they are feasible to implement, and they happen to be, by and large, compatible with ICD-10. So overall implications, if we talk about, if we look at substance, the overall gradation of no use, hazardous, harmful, and dependence, this pyramid that has often been talked about, it fits very well in the public health system's conceptualization of preventive interventions at various levels, at primary, secondary, and tertiary kind of prevention. So from the community-based to the clinical interventions, this hierarchy of diagnosis and the likelihood of the magnitude in which they exist in the community, that fits very well. Hence, in general, in terms of clinical delivery of treatment interventions, the new changes will not make too much of a difference. But in general, for health or organization of health services, it augurs well. Whatever changes they have brought in here. Again, if we talk of training, I do not. It's just that we need to now learn, adopt, and communicate using the language of ICD-11. So whatever clerical changes, as it were, are required, that will have to be brought in. But no major investment of resources as such. But as far as research is concerned, it opens a whole new set of research areas for us, those who are interested in addiction psychiatry, in clinical as well as community setting. We can consider researching what kind of symptoms are being endorsed in our patients, what kind of symptoms are important, how important is craving as a phenomena, what is the place of actually harm to others. So these are what happens to the overall category of behavioral addictions. So all these are areas in which more research can be conducted, and perhaps multi-centric kind of research can be conducted, which we will have diverse and rich clinical material. For more on the practical applicability of dependence criteria, I invite most of you, if not all, to our workshop during the breakout session. I'll be very ably assisted with my colleagues, Dr. Alok Agrawal, Associate Professor in my department, Dr. Preeti, DM, who is Assistant Professor at AIIMS Jodhpur, our MD Resident Omar Afroz, who is conducting a very interesting thesis on the diagnostic systems and their concordance. We will have a brief presentation on DSM-5, ICD-10, ICD-11 criteria, have an interesting role play where we will demonstrate history taking by a resident doctor of a live patient, and presentation and discussion with the faculty. And then we will interact and apply the diagnostic criteria there. Urging all of you shamelessly to using this opportunity to join APSI, Addiction Psychiatry Society of India, and inviting all of you to the first national conference of OPSI in December, going to be a virtual conference, particularly for the younger colleagues, those who have recently submitted their thesis in the area of addiction. There is Best Thesis Paper Award as well. So looking forward to have all of you in the conference. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir. That was a wonderful presentation, and there are actually 2 signature marks for that. I have just looked up when you started your presentation, there were around 190 participants, and now again there are 190 participants. All the participants have foregone their lunch, and you are being a truly captivating speaker. That is one observation. And the second, there are so many questions, but you have already opened up a window of opportunity for them to ask those questions during the interactive sessions.
Yes.
Doctor, if Dr. Mattu wants, if sir is still there, because I know that sir has been traveling from his resident to the NHS Trust. So if sir is still there, means should I take up questions? One or two questions maybe? Just for the sake. I think sir is still driving. So there is one, so don't kind of, you can ask all this, right, in the breakout sessions. There are at least a few questions regarding harm to others. So people have been wondering that what is the legal implication of harm to others, and does it have any implication concerning with regard to the Mental Health Care Act, for example, supported admission? Can you do supported admission for those who are fulfilling the criteria for harm to others?
Right. I have given some thought to it. As far as I understand, having a diagnosis of addiction, any kind of substance use disorder, does not absolve you of any criminal responsibility for any act that you may conduct, whether you have conducted that act under intoxication or not. If the intoxication was voluntary, if you knew you were drinking, then it does not absolve you of any criminal responsibility. So if that doesn't apply to the substance intoxication as a condition, it would not also apply to harm to others as well. So it will offer no legal protection as such to the user, other than the fact that some kind of intervention, if the perpetrator of this harm is deemed to require because of their pattern of substance use, that would be now facilitated by having this particular diagnostic category in place. So as such, there will be no legal protection. You will be absolved of your criminal responsibility, or you may not be really escaping a jail term or punishment because you happen to have this single episode of harmful use of alcohol before hitting her. But if you require some kind of counseling, some kind of mental health intervention, it should be possible. And if that intervention is contingent upon having a diagnostic label, then it should be possible with this. That's the brief answer.
Thank you very much, sir. So it has a lot of public health implication. If you need help, you can seek help, but it is not going to absolve you from the legal responsibility if you are doing it. Thank you very much. So there is one more question I think that we can take. How the strong internal drive is different from craving? Phenomenologically, I think Dr. Indu has asked this question.
Right. So the strong internal drive is something which ICD-11 says manifests by the centrality of use, its preoccupation with use and use despite harms. Craving, they say, is something different. Craving is a different phenomena. The urge, the irresistible desire or urge to use is a separate phenomena. The drive is the manifested in the behavior. Craving is a more of a internal phenomena which patient may complain of. The presence of craving may be one of the factors which leads to compulsive, repetitive use of substance, but the strong internal drive, as per the ICD-11's conceptualization, manifested by those three things that I was talking about.
Thank you very much, sir. So, sir, we all look forward to your session, and I think I will close the session now because, sir, Dr. Mattu, are you still there? Thank you. So I will hand it over to Ajay Pal. Dr. Ajay Pal, we have still 4 to 5 minutes time. I think we can start it after 5 minutes at 2. So, thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. We will start.
Thank you, everyone.